Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Our topic today is Understanding and Unpacking Revolutions, Teaching Thematically with Primary Sources. We're really excited to kind of dig into the topic today and think about how we can kind of teach thematically, with revolutions. And of course, to have our partner with us, the East Tennessee Historical Society. I'm going to turn things over to Lisa in just a second. But before I do that, a couple of quick housekeeping things. First off, please be sure that you're keeping your mics muted during the presentation. We do record this for inclusion on our YouTube channel. And if you would also in the participant list, be sure that you've renamed yourself with your first and last name. And again, that just helps us to track who's attended and then to know who we're responding to in the chat and such. And speaking of the chat, we do want today's session to be interactive. So if you would, if you want to go ahead and open up your chat box, tell us where you're joining us from, and maybe why you were interested in joining today's session in particular. And we also have the reaction buttons, and you can feel free to use those, hands clapping, thumbs up, all those kind of things. At the very end of today's session, we are going to do some Q&A, and so we'll also use that as a chance if people want to ask a question or make a point, we'll do that. And so hopefully not talk over each other. And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you would take a moment to complete the contact form, and we will drop that into the chat box again for those of you who joined us after I've shared that. And again, just be sure that you're adding your address, your mailing address at the very bottom of that form, and that's how that will get sent to you. So let me go ahead and turn things over to our partner, Lisa Oakley, for her to welcome us from the East Tennessee Historical Society.
Well, I'm just really tickled to be here and to be involved yet again in a great workshop. And our partnership is something that we feel strong, and we're looking forward to what we're able to do in the future. But as far as shorter term, I know a lot of people are thinking about summer. And we do have some offerings this summer, and Kira can answer questions, or Dr. Graham, about these offerings, as well as Layla. They will all be involved. And Layla has been working with us closely at the Historical Society, doing great things, as well as with TPS. So there's a great team on board to make sure that our summer programming can go well. We'll be partnering on June 24th with a Humanities Tennessee sponsored workshop. Humanities Tennessee is making it possible for us to work with Amy Costing and some partners that document and have historic sites and museums documenting the story of the Trail of Tears in Southeast Tennessee. We'll be visiting there virtually. This will be a webinar, but it will be a 9 to 12 o'clock Central Time, 10 to 1 o'clock Eastern Time webinar. So it'll be a little bit longer, but we'll be doing those virtual visits, as well as some great activities and having some incredible content from Amy Costing to talk about the Trail of Tears, a comparative look at the experiences of Southeastern tribal nations. That's a lot to say. We're going to do some comparative studies. We're going to look at not just the Cherokee, but other indigenous tribes that were involved in that removal story, and see how things compared, and again also visit Red Clay and visit some of the Southeastern Tennessee sites involved in the Trail of Tears story. And then on July the 8th through the 9th, a in-person workshop. We're so excited. Kira and Dr. Graham will be here, and Layla and I will be here at the East Tennessee History Center July 8th and 9th for 2 days of working with the social studies process standards. So there'll be lots of content, not just one focus of a theme, but bringing in different content elements and really exploring sources and those process standards, and how to implement things in your classroom. And for those of y'all that have participated in those 2-day workshops, you know, they're really valuable. And it's really, you get to know each other, and it's a different experience. So, and I think we're all going to be just so excited about the opportunity to get back together in person. So for that workshop, just like for this workshop, you would email me for either one of those, the June 24th or the July 8th and 9th workshops. Just email Oakley@easttnhistory.org, same email you used for this workshop. And we're just looking forward to the summer. This summer is definitely going to be a little bit different than last summer and from last year, but thank you all for sticking with us, for exploring the possibilities. We immediately got together and talked when everything started happening last year. And it's like, okay, what do we do? But not only what do we do for our workshops and to put things in place, but what do we do for you, for the teachers? Because we always want to serve you. We always want to make our resources available, and we want to bring in new ideas. So thank you for responding to that. And these webinars, it's opened up our audience. I mean, it's been incredible to invite those of you all from across the state, not physically here to the East Tennessee History Center, but we do hope you'll visit. We are open. We're in downtown Knoxville, across from the Tennessee Theater. And we just opened a signature exhibit on an artist from East Tennessee, Samuel Shaver, and we're talking about his 19th century portraiture, but in context of the times, of the people he painted, and then sometimes those that were more silent. And also, that he didn't chronicle through his paintings, but we're also relooking at our teacher website, teachtnhistory.org. Incredible resources there in the stages for that material too. So we're trying to bring everything up to date so it can be the most helpful for you. And I thank TPS and Humanities Tennessee for their help with that process as well. So that's a lot. I appreciate a few minutes of your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the evening. I'm looking forward to the workshop. Anything, Kira, that I need to clarify? Because I don't know what my connection's been like, so.
Yeah, I think it kind of broke up one time or two, but mostly worked well. So yeah, no, I think that's it. I did put it in the chat again. If you're interested in joining us for the July and 8th and 9th, we are going to be at limited capacity on that. So again, if you definitely want to come to that, be sure to contact Lisa as soon as you can to make sure that you have reserved your spot for that 2-day workshop. So with that, let me just quickly talk about our plan for today. And in the chat box, if you would, I want you guys to think about a couple questions. First, how do you guys teach thematically? Do you teach thematically? And how can this approach be helpful for students? So a couple questions to think about. And if you want to be kind of sharing some thoughts in there, and we'll kind of circle back around to some of your thoughts there when we get to the very end in our Q&A session. So our plan for today's session, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Stacy Graham, here in just a second, and she's going to talk to us about how we define a revolution, and then work us through an activity about the Russian Revolution. And then Layla Smallwood, who's been a graduate research assistant with us, is going to take us through an activity comparing the language of the American, French, and Haitian revolutions. And then, like I said, we'll have some time at the end for some questions and some feedback from you guys, as both of these are new activities and we would love to hear from you. And then also think about, again, how we can approach teaching things like revolution thematically. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Stacy.
Thank you, Kira. I'm going to share my screen and start off with my PowerPoint on unpacking revolutions. Okay, so you should be able to see the first slide. And okay, this is something that we haven't really tackled a lot before. When we talk, we've done a lot of different resources on the American Revolution, but we haven't thought of it in terms of what makes it a revolution. And, we don't have a lot of resources on our website about other world revolutions. So this was a really great learning experience for us. And it really made us have to think about, well, how would you teach something like this thematically? And so we're going to start off by defining revolution. And if you feel like taking a crack at that, why don't you add your definition to the chat box, and then my colleagues can read out any of your answers to me because I can't see the chat box right even if it's just like one or two things that you feel like need to be there in order to fit this definition.
So while folks are thinking about their definition, all right, so change has been in there.
Age, good.
Big change in leadership.
Yeah, good.
I think violence and war.
Violence. Oh, there is that.
A group of people rising up against injustice,
Ooh,
changing something, society, government, technology, a sudden radical change.
ooh.
Uh, Thinking of revolution as a long-term revolt that changes leadership.
Mm.
A systematic and rapid change in the status quo in thought and action.
Ooh,
I like that.
good.
Yeah. Standing up for what you believe in.
Oh, you're all right. Those are great. This is good. So we're all pretty much gonna be on the same wavelength here. So I was, if I had to come up with my own, I'd come up with very similar things. But I went and I looked for somebody's like kind of official academic definition. And what I did was I emailed a colleague of mine in the history department who I know has taught a class before where he thematically looks at certain revolutions throughout world history, modern world history. And he uses this book, very short introduction to revolutions, as part of this larger series by the Oxford University Press, where it's like short introduction to lots of different things. But anyways, by Jack Goldstone. And so this is how Jack Goldstone starts to define revolution. So he starts off by saying, we can therefore best define revolution in terms of both observed mass mobilization and institutional change, and a driving ideology carrying a vision of social justice. And this is kind of after he's talked a bit about how a lot of people come at it one way or the other. And I'm really glad that I heard among your answers things that fall into both of these categories, because so he's arguing that you need this kind of ideology for this greater good, for this kind of perception of social justice that needs to be part of it too. And so he kind of joins those together. And then his official definition that he comes up with is, so revolution is the forcible overthrow of a government through mass mobilization, whether military or civilian or both, in the name of social justice to create new political institutions. So I think that goes along with what you were all saying very well. And then he starts to break it down. And so this is something that I had kind of done off the top of my head before I read before I read this part of his book. And so we came up with a list of elements that make up revolutions, that's based on his introduction and tweaked a little bit according to what we already thought. And I will get to that in just a moment, but I didn't realize Kira was going to tell you what we were going to do today. So I have this slide telling you what we're going to do today. We're going to be looking at 4 different revolutions in world history and see how these fit this definition, and some of the components that we're going to be looking at in the next slide. So this is, of course, the American Revolution, that's New York on fire, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution. All those 3 things are actually very closely related to each other. And then one that comes much later, the Russian Revolution, which I had a lot of fun learning a lot about. So the basic elements of a revolution that are according to Jack Goldstone and kind of tweaked by our definition. So there's some sort of crisis that plunges a people or a country into a mess that they then have to get out of. And of course, this is where a lot of the dissent comes from. So there's some sort of crisis. whether it's like economic depression or something like that. And then there are grievances. So this are people caught in this crisis. What do they want from the ruling party? What do they say they want? And then, of course, new leaders emerge. And these are people who often end up as heroes or martyrs or villains later on, and often have statues of them. And then mass mobilization. So, of course, you have to have something that turns the tide of public opinion so that you have that kind of momentum. Ideology, of course, the heart of it, and then the new political order that emerges. Now, I know that this is not the 100% best list of basic elements of a revolution that exists in the world. So if you have any kind of advice or comments about it, then, please, you can email us, you can throw them in the chat box, because there are other things too. Like after there's a new political order, does it matter if there's recognition by other world states? Do you need longevity? Does it need to be successful? Like how long does it need to be successful? So there are lots of other things that you can put in there. And of course, a lot of these really overlap with each other too, as you'll see when we look at some primary sources later. But so what we did was we created a graphic organizer that takes these 6 different elements and gives students a place to actually write out what it is they think their particular revolution that they're studying, how it fits this kind of pattern. And so I'm just going to stop sharing for a second because, yeah, my apologies. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth just a tiny bit. So I don't want that one. I want this one between my screen and my internet screen and my PowerPoint screen. So here's the graphic organizer, and it's not completely finished yet. So this is not posted to our website yet, but it will be soon. And it is posted right now to a hidden link, but we'd like to consider this a beta version. So if you want a beta version, you can ask us for it and we'll get it to you. But the final finished thing will be available soon. But anyway, so on the left are the 6 general characteristics present in many revolutions throughout world history. On the right, fill in specific examples that align with each characteristic from the specific revolution that you are studying. So it kind of emphasizes, or kind of, explains a little bit what each of these things are. So like a crisis is economic depression, social unrest, etc., that happened in the lead up to the revolution. Grievances, specific complaints or demands made by the oppressed group of the oppressing group, etc. And then there's a reference to Jack Goldstone's book at the bottom. If you're teaching at the high school level, this might be something you might want in your classroom. It's not just for college students. It's like this whole series was made kind of for general public. So it's not really like overly scholarly. Okay, I'm going to go back. Sorry, I have to stop share and then reshare to get back to my PowerPoint. Here we go. All right. So, question. And here's where I would like for you to, again, please list some of your thoughts in the chat box. How is a revolution different from revolt, civil war, coup d'etat, reform, other kinds of things like riots or whatever, strikes, those kinds of things? How is revolution different?
So a revolution is usually more successful than something that's labeled a revolt or a rebellion.
Good.
There has to be a radical ideological change in the society.
Good.
I think for civil war, I think about that it's basically it's two people fighting over who gets to maintain the status quo.
Okay. Okay. Good.
Revolution is a systematic change, but it can be peaceful.
Okay. So yeah, I guess like one of the main differences is, are we fighting over who gets to maintain the status quo? Are we trying to reform the status quo? Or are we like trying to completely deconstruct and build a new?
Revolts can be put down.
Yes. It's so simple, but it's totally true. All right. That's great. And then, here are the 6 elements again. So sometimes what keeps these things from being considered a revolution, depending on exactly what they are and their context in history, is they may lack one or more of these main elements. And then again, consider how successful, like you said, and then longevity. Like, did it actually create something new? America's 245 years old almost. So I'd say that's some pretty decent longevity. Let's hope for 245 years more. Okay. So thanks for all of your thoughts. And now that your brains are ready for revolution, let's go ahead and tackle. Oh, I thought I knew at least a bit about the Russian Revolution before I started reading a bit more about it to create a lesson plan. And it turns out I hadn't even skimmed the surface. It's such a complicated topic. And yeah, it's also fraught with all the different American perspectives that we have hanging over from the Cold War era, and this idea of communism and what Russia became and has become after this, which is not necessarily what it was trying to achieve at the time of its revolution. So yeah, this is quite a hard topic to teach, and I really don't envy you world history teachers who have to try to do this in a day, because the lesson plan that I created is a 2-day one, because for reasons you'll see. So what I'm going to do is, this is a lesson plan that, like I said, it's not finished, it's not posted yet, because I want to use maybe some of your feedback to tweak it into a final form, and then we'll post it to our website soon. So it's a 2-day activity, and I'm going to walk you through it, but we will take some time to analyze a few selected primary sources kind of in more depth, starting with this one. And I'm going to actually move to my internet screen soon so that you can zoom in on it. But I do want to give you the title of it, because those 2 big circles that have the Cyrillic script in the top corners, they say February 1917 and October 1917. So that's the translation for those 2 text bubbles. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, go back to my internet screen where I have this image waiting for us. And I'm going to, I have to move the strip of people videos over. Okay, so I am going to zoom in. This is as far as you can go. So I hope that you all can see enough of the details on your computer screens to start kind of putting in the chat box what you observe. So you see there are several kind of vignettes of things going on. You've got these 4 roundels, and then you have these 2 kind of larger engravings, and then this central obelisk, and then some symbolic elements as well. So there's a lot going on in this poster. And if any of my colleagues are still there to monitor the chat box and let me know what people are putting in there, then that'd be great.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, Layla.
Okay, okay. So someone said most of what I know about the Russian Revolution is based on references in movies and TV shows. Someone said I see a cannon being fired.
Cannons, yep. Okay, so that
Mass
fair.
marches.
All right, mass marching. Yeah, lots of banners.
I see Lenin being depicted as he is listening to the masses.
Good. So this right here is Vladimir Lenin.
Red.
Red. Yeah, there's a reason. Red is a very symbolic color for Russia.
Lots of depictions of soldiers. Is that an anvil in the like middle center, like a hammer or an anvil?
Oh, this right here?
Mm-hmm. What is
the
that?
hammer and the sickle.
Okay.
Where have we seen those before?
Someone said obelisk, like out of Washington Monument, or like our Washington Monument, excuse me. Hammer and sickle, which is a part of their country logo.
Yeah, right. That's on their flag. Their flag is also red. Right.
Banner says something about freedom and wheat sheaves for the worker. I think workers, excuse me.
Right. I love it. Okay, let me ask you another question. What is the significance of the two dates, February of 1917 and October 1917? And if you don't know, that's fine. No, not everyone teaches the Russian Revolution.
Someone said when it started and when it ended.
Okay, that's a really good guess. And so I'm going to give you points for that, even though it's not entirely true.
Someone else said when the revolution started, the arrest of the royal family.
That's actually got some good insight there. Okay. All right. So, the Russian Revolution that we think of when we talk about the Russian Revolution and the rise of the Bolsheviks, sometimes it's called the Bolshevik Revolution, is the October 1917 date. And what happened in February of that year was it is also referred to as a revolution, but I would probably not call it that. It's kind of a precursor. So in February, actually, so at that time, Russia was on a different calendar. So their February, our March. There was kind of a pre-revolution. There were lots of strikes. And that's when the Tsar abdicated. Tsar Nicholas II, he abdicated as a response to the February Revolution, and a provisional government was set up. And then, of course, more stuff happened, and it was just, the provisional government itself was overthrown, and the Bolsheviks came to power as a result of the October Revolution. Okay, so I'm actually going to go back, to the PowerPoint and talk you through a little bit of the Russian Revolution in terms of context. Now, how I've designed the lesson plan is to start off with content, because it's kind of confusing, and you can't, like, a lot of your students might already remember stuff and know stuff about the American Revolution or even the French Revolution, but probably fewer of them know about the details of the Russian Revolution. And so it's hard to start with primary sources and have them extract the story out of it because it is so complicated. It's better to start with the story, and then they can look at the primary sources afterwards. So that's the way I designed this. And so I actually linked to the Russian Revolution and Civil War crash course video, because he does a really good job about being, indicating nuance and complication when it's, appropriate, and not oversimplifying things, but also not giving you so many things that you can't make sense out of it. Now, this is a really long video, so I recommend, and I will have the different timestamps, cutting it in half. And after the first half, asking students to go over their answers, because you want to give them this worksheet that we looked at before you show them the video, so that they can start filling it in while they're watching the video. And so when you pause halfway through, they should have some stuff down for crisis and grievances. They should have some answers down, so you can discuss those and then watch the rest and then discuss those. Of course, you pretty much will be spending the whole first day doing a rundown of, okay, what are the elements of a revolution, kind of the way we just did, watching this video, and then explaining how it is this video describes the Russian Revolution in a way that it fits these 6 different elements. And so because that's such a complicated thing for anybody, much less high school students, I think that 45 to 50 minutes is a good time period for that. And I wouldn't want to squish it into something shorter, or else they'll just be super confused. And so, but let's go through this worksheet, because I kind of wrote down little sketchy beginner answers to what these would be. And hold on, because I have to move my all you little video tiles over to the side now. So for crisis, yes, there was that revolution in February of 1917, but there was also a revolution in Russia in 1905 that you have to talk about when you're talking about the background to the Russian Revolution. This is talked about in the video, but one thing is not mentioned in the video is why in 1905 did so many people go on strike? Because Russia was involved in a war with Japan. And so there's lots of unrest at home because of that, because war is a crisis on the home front always. But then, in 1914, Russia goes to war with Germany for World War I. And I think we all have heard about how the Russian army suffered like severe losses and lost men in the millions. And that had a huge impact on the home front and morale. And part of the reason why they lost so many people was because of really bad leadership on the Tsar's part. And so the thing that says Women's Day Strike 1917, that's the February pre-revolution, I'm going to call it, because it happened on International Women's Day. And then for grievances, what is it that they wanted? Okay, not grievances are complaints, excuse me. So grievances are things that they're mad about. I'm sorry. They don't want low wages and food scarcity. They're mad about low wages because we're so many strikes and industrial strikes and things like that going on, railroad strikes, because these workers were not getting paid a living wage. Food scarcity. The war effort had really stripped the countryside and people were starving and there were bread riots. And so, inflation, and then the lack of response on the part of the Tsarist government to do anything about it. And even the provisional government between February and October not really meeting the needs. And then, of course, the leadership that emerges, you all heard of Lenin. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, already have heard of Leon Trotsky as well. Trotsky, the more organizational genius, he wrote a lot of, he was more of a philosopher, and Lenin, Lenin's philosophy was violence, change through violence. And he doesn't actually live much longer. He dies actually in 1924, and that's when Stalin takes over. But we're not going to talk about Stalin because the Russian Revolution leads into the Russian Civil War, which lasts for quite a while. And that's when Stalin comes to power and all the purges, and it gets really, really messy. And so this kind of keeps us on the front end, the very first few years. So that's the only way I could keep it straight. So with mass mobilization, Soviet is a word that refers to a working person's council, and they had these in all the different cities and villages. And so they were kind of like leadership on the local level. And Trotsky was actually president of the Soviet in Petrograd, which of course is Jesus, an old name for was Petrograd, because Leningrad, no, Petrograd was St. Petersburg. That's right. So these were actually pretty powerful locally. That's what Soviet means. That's where that word comes from. And then, of course, the soldiers. You had a lot of disaffected soldiers. Not all of them, of course, but there's so many. Like, we're talking such a huge population that you could have a huge number of disaffected soldiers who eventually joined the Red Army, and still have enough who oppose the Bolsheviks to join the White Army later on. Lots of students, the intelligentsia, of course, lashing on to these new ideologies. Peasants, because they're starving, because they don't have bread, and workers, because Lenin starts off by saying, this is going to be, you know, this is for you guys. We're going to be a country for the workers. He does not keep that promise, though. Ideology. So the ideology here, which you all noted is kind of necessary to have, of course, anti-capitalist, pro-worker, an abolishment of class distinction, and it's not an entire abolishment of private property like people think communism was, but it did include the nationalization of all the major industries. I mean, Russia before this, the czars were they had a ruling royal dynasty. There were lots of rich elite landowners. But even though there were a lot of those, they were still an extremely small portion of the population. And so most people were landless peasants or urban dwellers, and they were just at the mercy of these landlords that were completely disconnected with the needs of most people in the lower and the middle classes. And so, like, this idea that you're going to destroy these class distinctions was very, that idea was very liberating to most of the people in Russian society. And the new political order, which you need to have a revolution. The Bolsheviks reject socialism because there were lots of socialists were actually one of many different political parties in Russia during the provisional government. And after the October Revolution, Lenin had an election, and the Socialist Party actually got more votes than the Bolshevik Party. So he just did away with the results of the election and said, no, the Bolsheviks are going to be in power. And then he purged all people who were not Bolsheviks because he was Lenin. And so, but yeah, he really demanded kind of party loyalty, and there was no room for any kind of political dissent, even though a lot of people were still kind of holding on to the more moderate socialist ideas. So the Bolsheviks come out as communists. Now, this is not the same kind of communism that Karl Marx is structuring in the mid-19th century, even though it's distantly based on that. Less distantly if you read the works of, the pure philosophers like Trotsky and stuff. But yeah. And of course, it's still not the exact same thing as when we think of communism today, because communism in practice is very different than in theory. And there has never been a state in the history of the world that's actually practiced pure communism as it's, the political philosophy states. But anyway, and then the USSR, which stands for Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, is formed officially in 1922. And it lasts until when? Does anyone, I know we remember, but do we remember exactly what date? Okay, Layla, you don't remember. You might know, but you don't remember.
I've taught this. I know it, but I don't remember it. Yeah.
Yes, there's a difference. So when did the USSR last until? Is anyone saying like 1989, 1990?
So we see 1980s, 1989,
Okay.
89.
Yeah, 89, I think, is the fall of the Berlin Wall. And 91, I think, under Gorbachev was, or the dude that came after, that was like, I think it was 91 when it officially just went kaput. But that's a long time. It's a long time. All right. So there's your brief history of the Russian Revolution. And yeah, okay. So let's look at some primary sources. So, okay. So then what happens is, so that's day one, right? Just getting the actual events straight and thinking about it in terms of how do these things show these elements of a revolution? And then the beginning of day two, there's a clip from Dr. Zhivago, because that's a really great movie that is about the Russian Revolution. It's not about the Russian Revolution, it's about a love story set against the backdrop of the Russian Revolution. So this is a clip that I'm not going to show it right now, we don't have time, but it's a clip that comes from the beginning where Alec Guinness's character is narrating what had happened with Russian soldiers in World War I, and talking about how that horrible, terrible situation laid the groundwork for the revolution. And so this will really fit in with what your students were learning on day one. And see if they recognize, Alec Guinness, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Okay. All right. So then, wait, I'm going to stop sharing for just 1 second because I want to show you. Okay, so I made a student packet, and this is what you would divide students into groups, and you would give each group one primary source. And now there's like 16 primary sources in this student packet. So you might want to do a preview of them because you don't want 16 different groups in class. But the thing is that they're numbered and they're in no particular order. They're not like in chronological order or anything, but they're numbered, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 should be able to be construed as to fitting in the 6 separate categories. So if you just want to use the first 6 and make 6 groups among your students, then that ought to work. Although sometimes the grievances and the ideology overlap, and sometimes the grievances and the crises overlap, as you might realize, and the leadership and the ideology overlap, which is obvious. So a lot of these are text-based, which I worked very hard to excerpt. So many awesome newspaper articles. That's why I just kept making this longer and longer, because I kept finding so many good things. We're going to come back and look at 2 of these more closely on the PowerPoint. But I just wanted to kind of run through. Here's one of the last American ambulance in Russia poster. Oh, the red peril warning in the United States, where the excerpts are from, more excerpts. And then these are not Library of Congress sources, but I threw in a couple pieces of art at the end because, this is also a cultural revolution and there's a lot of propaganda going on. So there's a lot of really awesome artwork and, graphic work and that kind of stuff that is part of this, which, is just totally riches. Okay, so let's look at a couple of these. Oh yeah, that last painting was, the Cheka was the beginning of the secret police. So it was the proto-KGB, and it was like built by Lenin and Trotsky, and it was awful, and it was used to get rid of their political opposition because, nothing says that you're talking from a position of strength like eliminating your political opponents. Okay, so here's one of the primary sources that one of your student groups would be analyzing. And so you want them to do a basic analysis, observe, reflect, and question. And then also think about, well, okay, what category or categories would this fit into? So that banner, by the way, it basically says, long live the Council of Workmen's and Soldiers' Deputies. So luckily that's translated for us in the title, which you can see below. The top 2 words in the largest letters are "Da Zdravstvuyet," which means long live. And so the Russian national anthem actually starts with those 2 words, but then it has different words that come after that. But please make a note of the date too. This is St. Petersburg, April 9th, 1917. So which of those categories would this fit best into?
So I'm thinking mass mobilization.
I'm thinking that as well. Yeah, and that was the one that was foremost in my mind when I chose this, because it does a really great job of depicting these. But you can also notice that most of those people look to be women. And so remember how I said that Russia was on a different kind of calendar? So yeah, anyway, I don't know if this April is their date or our date, but we can see that it's between the February and the October revolutions. So this is growing out of that International Women's Day strike, which might explain why there's so many women on the street. So this actually happens right before Lenin seizes power. So it's also, you could say, part of the grievances, these continued strikes, asking for, trying to get people to join their cause for, resources from the provisional government. I see that I'm running out of time, so I'm not actually going to spend time on this next one, but I did want to just show you an example of a text-based source. They actually print verbatim what the communist ideology in American newspapers all the time. And it's weird, the American media is like it's kind of torn, because at first, when it thinks that it's some democratic overthrow of an elitist regime, they're all for it. And there's a lot of support among the American intelligentsia. And then when like the violence and the purges start, and then the communism becomes a bit more radically clear, they kind of turn against it. But you can find a lot of the actual words like this manifesto of the Communist International, which was formed by Trotsky. And so this is, it's really great, talking about countries like the United States and their immeasurable vileness, because of course, capitalism, and calling for proletarians of all lands unite. And of course, proletarian would be a really big vocabulary word for your students. All right, so I am just going to end by showing you, this would be then the essay prompt that you would give them at the end. So the graphic organizer would be something that you could assess them on. And if you wanted to give them a writing assignment, think about, okay, so was it successful? Why or why not? And so that's all I have for that. And now that we've kind of hinted at a lot of violence and bloodshed and not following through with your workers' rights ideals, we're going to move on to Layla, who is going to talk about language in these ideologies. And so there you go.
Okay. Hey, y'all. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, cool. All right. How are we doing? You've made it to almost the end of the week. Let me know in the chat box how you're doing. We're going to be talking about revolutionary languages today, or the language of revolutions, revolutionary language, however you want to put it. So I'm going to be asking you to, Suzanne, I'm going to be asking you to interact with me in the chat box throughout this activity. I will be using Jamboard for this. Has anybody ever used Jamboard in your class? If you have, let me know in the chat box. I like Jamboard because you can use it if you're one-to-one, or if you want students to work in small groups using technology. You can also, Jamboard. You can also duplicate it in the classroom if you don't have technology. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with y'all and show you what I'm working with. So this is Jamboard, and you have different places. You can make this through Google. It's free. You can share the link with your students and they can interact. I have a Post-it note here, so you can add sticky notes, type in what you want to say, and students can type their answers like that. So very fun, interactive pieces. So I'm going to be using Jamboard, but I just want you guys to interact with the chat. But in this lesson idea, I will mention Jamboard. So if you get this email with the lesson links later on, know this is what I'm talking about. So we're going to be using Jamboard today. So in the chat, I want you guys to answer this question for me because we're going to be talking about revolutionary language and comparing revolutions. So what words or phrases or people, what really comes to mind when you think of revolutionary language? Okay, violent, equality. I'm working off of a few screens so I can see. Fighting, free, good. Liberty, overthrow, interesting. Do certain people come to mind when you think of revolutionary language? Language used to motivate others. Jefferson, yes, okay. Determined for change. Propaganda, yes, good. The Federalist Papers, okay. So we have a lot of these different pieces that we think of, and we can really connect to that American Revolution, right? Franklin, good. So what phrases come to mind? What ideas come to mind when you think of revolutionary language? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Good. Oh man, Suzanne, you hit me with the French. Oh, liberty, equality, and brotherhood or fraternity. We're going to go with the English translation. I took French in college, but I can't pronounce anything. All right. We the people. Good. We have not yet begun to fight. I like the Hamilton reference there. Okay. Ultimatums. Give me liberty or give me death. Who said that? We're going to see something very similar. Yes, Patrick Henry. Good. So good. Yeah. So we have these different pieces, especially from the American Revolution, that we can connect these names, these faces, these ideas. But when we connect the language of the American Revolution to the language of other revolutionary documents, we're going to see very similar ideas and concepts. So this lesson, I'm just going to run you through a quick activity with the 3 different documents for the 3 different revolutions. This activity will have the entire documents linked, excuse me, when you're looking at them with your students, but I just have a few excerpts that I'll be featuring for this lesson. Okay, so the first document, we're going to be talking about the American Revolution. We're going to do this chronologically, even though we're looking at the revolutionary theme, we are going to be doing this chronologically. So everybody should be pretty familiar with this part of the Declaration of Independence. So for this activity, what you'd first do, you would ask your students to read this and identify words they don't know. So this might be something we're introducing, even with high school students. I think these are some world history standards as well, world and American history. You could ask them to go through and circle the words that they are unfamiliar with. We're not going to do that part. So what we are going to do, though, is we are going to read through it, and I want you to type the action words that you see. So if you hear an action word, or if while you're reading it in your head, if you want to, you see an action word, type that in the chat box for me. And I am going to attempt to read this for us. So when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from, from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when in a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object, evinces excuse me, a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and is such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. So, yes, I see a lot of action words, right? And these are not like really passive action words, right? These are aggressive action words. We have throw, provide, constrains, alters, reduce. We have institute, dictate, throw off. There are a lot of pieces here that you could have students pick out these action words, right? Dissolve, good. Okay, so you would have students do that. Sorry, lost my page. After they pick out those action words. And then you would come back and talk about this document. So those action words will help us break down this revolutionary document, this revolutionary language. What's the purpose of this document? Why in the American Revolution are these people coming together to write this document? Let's be specific. Why are these men coming together to write this document? Yeah, I tell my students it's the ultimate breakup letter. Yes, they are unhappy about taxation to justify revolution, right? And if you go through after this, they start listing their grievances. So those reasons why they're upset, their complaints that Dr. Graham just kind of talked us through as well. Establishing a new country, good. So this is where you could start to lay out some timelines for your students with the American Revolution. What do they know? Why are these people complaining? Look at these taxation attempts, look at the grievances, and kind of connect them to those acts that are being pushed forward and to the tensions that are building, especially after the end of the French and Indian War. How are those tensions continuing to build until we get to this point, right? And create that timeline for your student. So point out, yeah, I mean, there are so many grievances and issues. Nobody really knows anything other than this first part, right? We don't really connect the grievances with this. At least I didn't when I was younger. So this document here, we see a lot of aggressive language, or I guess not passive language if we're looking at it. We also are going to see this type of language, this revolutionary language, in other documents as well. So this is in 1776. And let's just remember for a minute, what country steps up and fights alongside the United States during the American Revolution? France, good. Yeah, so this will be something to kind of remind your kids, hey, remember France stepped up and helped the United States when we were trying to create a new nation? Well, France has a document like this as well. And it's interesting because the document that is for France's, I guess, Declaration of Independence, it's the Declaration of Rights of Man. Yes, so Thomas Jefferson actually kind of writes some of this beginnings of this document for the French Revolution with Lafayette. So they have these language connections, right? And they are trying to mirror in this Declaration of Rights of Man the language of the Declaration of Independence. They are trying to do what the Americans did, the common people against the monarchy, right? So does America step up and help the French? Nope. No, right. And that might be something to say as well. Like, we've got our own country, and we're going to see these kind of sentiments echoed in other documents throughout. Like, these countries who have their freedom now don't really care about the countries who are fighting for revolution later on. So I want you guys now to look at this document. We're going to go through and do the same thing with those action words, but I also want you to think about with this document, how is the language of this document similar to the Declaration of Independence? So this is in 1789, so the beginning of the French Revolution. So this is in French, so this is a translation. I did not do it, just saying. So the representatives of the French people organized as a national assembly, believing that ignorance, neglect, or contempt of the rights of man are the sole cause of public calamities and of the corruption of government, have determined to set forth in a solemn declaration the natural, unalienable, and sacred rights of man, in order that this declaration, being constantly before all the members of the social body, shall remind them continually of their rights and duties, in order that the acts of the legislative power, as well as those of the executive power, may be compared at any moment with the objects and purposes of all political institutions, and may thus be more respected. And lastly, in order that the grievances of the citizens, based hereafter upon simple and incontestable principles, shall tend to the maintenance of the Constitution and redound to all happiness of all. So, in consequence whereof, the National Assembly recognizes and declares, in the presence and under the auspices of the Supreme Being, the following rights of man and of the citizen. There are 17 articles total. These are just the first two. Men are born free and remain free and equal in rights. Social distinctions may be based only on consideration of the common good. The aim of every political association is the preservation of the natural and imprescriptible rights of man. These rights are liberty, property, safety, and resistance to oppression. So what are some similarities in these two documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Declaration of Rights of Man, two revolutionary documents? Good. So we see they're both organized. They both address the grievances and happiness for all, right? Make it sound like the document represents all people, like the Declaration of Independence. And when we get to the Haitian Revolution, we're going to realize they're not talking about all people, right? So similar to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Good. So we have these revolutionary ideals, these concepts, these words that we're using. What words do we see similar to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness? Do you see any other similar words or concepts in this document when compared to the Declaration of Independence? Liberty, good. We also see, good, liberty, property, safety. They also talk about neglect, right? Neglect of the monarchy or of the empire. All men are created equal is similar to Article 1, good. Happiness, good. Yes, it's very like, insert this phrase here, right? We can see how they kind of worked this through. We the people, representatives of the French people, good. They have this declaration. They're saying this is why we're doing it. This is why we're complaining. And here is what we want set forth, right? So very interesting. So when you break these documents down with your students on this timeline, and you have the Declaration of Independence in 1786 or 1776, and you have the Declaration of Rights of Man in 1789, you'll see these languages, this revolutionary language is not just an American concept, right? We see this concept happening, these revolutionary concepts are something that's also happening in other parts of the world. Good. So let's go on to our next document. So this document, I do want to provide you guys with some context really quickly. And the lesson plan for this will provide you with a timeline and a little bit more in-depth context for you and for your students in this. We're just going through the documents right now and a little bit of the activity just for time's sake. But I do want you guys to know that in 1790, in Haiti, a group of men, it literally translates to free men of color in Haiti, they demand equal rights based on the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Based on this, because remember, Haiti is a part of France, right? They're under French rule. So, yeah. So we are seeing these free men of color saying, well, we deserve to have the same rights as men in France, right? And as men, we are citizens. So we see them getting that recognition. We do see the king during this time give them recognition, and the colonists in Haiti freak out and they start revolting in Haiti as well. So we see this like probably 15-year struggle between Haiti and France, and this revolution, people just I feel like when people teach the Haitian Revolution, it's just, it happens and then you're done. This is a long, drawn out thing that is happening from the time that the news of the Declaration of Man hits Haiti, right? The time that they hear this idea, these concepts of freedom and citizenship, it is pushing those wheels forward in the minds of Haitians as well. So this is another document, and it is the Haitian Declaration of Independence, and it is from 1804. So in 1790, the free men of color from Haiti had said, we want citizenship as well. But they are still fighting for this citizenship and fighting for recognition and fighting for Haitian independence, essentially, for another 15 years. So this is a little bit more excerpted than the other documents. I've taken a few pieces from the beginning of the Haitian Declaration of Independence and a few from like a middle chunk. So this one is actually Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and he is giving this speech, and it is the Haitian Declaration of Independence. So it starts out as citizens. It is not enough to have expelled the barbarians who have bloodied our land for 2 centuries. It is not enough to have restrained those ever-evolving factions that one after another mocked the specter of liberty that France dangled before you. We must, with one last act of national authority, forever assure the empire of liberty in the country of our birth. We must take any hope of re-enslaving us away from the inhuman government that for so long kept us in the most humiliating torpor. In the end, we must live independent or die. Independence or death, let these sacred words unite us and be the signal of battle and our reunion. So that first part, what similarities do we see to the first 2 documents we talked about? What similarities in language, what action words do we see? Yeah, calling out the French as barbarians and hypocrites, which I'm sure shocked the French. Using the term sacred as a unification term. Give me liberty. I told y'all that would come up again. Give me liberty or give me death. Patrick Henry, your words carry on. So liberty or death, independence or death. Yes. Another word that sticks out to me, enslaving. We must take any hope of re-enslaving us away. Right? So that's another chunk that sticks out. So this seems to be written for the Haitians. Yes. So this is for the Haitians, not for another government, right? This is for them rallying together. Good. Yes, humiliating. Speaking to that condition of enslavement. Good. So let's read the second part. We have dared, let me just open it here. We have dared to be free. Let us be thus by ourselves and for ourselves. Let us imitate the grown child. His own weight breaks the boundary that has become an obstacle to him. What people fought for us, what people wanted us to gather the fruits of our labor, and what dishonorable absurdity to conquer in order to be enslaved. Let us leave this description for the French. They have conquered, but are no longer free. Let us walk down another path. Let us imitate those people who, extending their concern into the future and dreading to leave an example of cowardice for posterity, preferred to be exterminated rather than lose their place as one of the world's free peoples. Let us ensure, however, that a missionary spirit does not destroy our work. Let us allow our neighbors to breathe in peace. May they live quietly under the laws that they have made for themselves, and let us not. As revolutionary firebrands, declare ourselves the lawgivers of the Caribbean, nor let our glory consist in troubling the peace of the neighboring islands. Unlike that which we inhabit, theirs has not been drenched in the innocent blood of its inhabitants. They have no vengeance to claim from the authority that protects them. So that second chunk there, what action words are we seeing? Right. They're really condemning the French government and trying to pull in Haitians, right? Citizens. They're trying to pull them in, right? Fought, gather, conquer, break the boundary. Yes, we see all of these like terms, but these are more terms, like you said, to the people and not necessarily to the government who they are breaking ties with or who they are declaring their independence from. So in doing this activity with your students, You would look through these, have them look at a timeline or create a timeline using the context, look at these documents, find words they don't know, define them, and then action words, really put those together. That might be fun to do, like a word cloud of all the action words when you're looking at language, revolutionary language. And you would also ask them, how are these documents similar? What do you see in all of these documents that you would say are like the foundational pieces of revolutionary language, the strongholds? So we have this multiple perspectives, this Venn diagram worksheet, excuse me, where you can compare all three sources with your students. So this activity will, like I said, be in a lesson plan. This is just a rough draft of it, but this is a good way to start getting your students to look at how the language of revolutions is really something that is, it's not defined just by American Revolution. There are so many other revolutions that are pulling from these similar themes, these similar languages, these similar ideals and concepts. All right. So, and again, this is still on the drawing board. We haven't completely finished it yet. So if you have questions or suggestions, I'm definitely open to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Layla, for sharing that, and thank you, Stacey, for sharing the Russian Revolution piece. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I know we're running a little long on time, so we won't spend a lot of time here. But I do want us to think about a bit, some things that we have heard that can help us as we think about teaching thematically. And I know one thing that pops in my head when we go forward and kind of thinking about how we could teach thematically is kind of starting with a piece like Stacey shared with us to begin with, where we have an overarching theme, and then we kind of break down the pieces, to that theme, so that students can look at how that pops up time and time again as you're going through your subject. So that's one way. If anyone has any other ideas about how you might approach teaching that thematically, feel free to kind of drop that in the chat box. Also, if you have any questions about either of the two activities, feel free to drop that in there. Or if you would like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand. I know oftentimes when we think about teaching thematically, trying to work through our standards and do it can be a bit of a challenge to figure out kind of how to make that work, given the overall number of standards you guys have to cover. So again, I think having that defining term, maybe that defining question that you're answering, can be a way to broach that while still kind of going through the chronological order of your standards. So again, this is gonna be something we're gonna circle back to and do think about some more and maybe bring into some other workshops, because I do think it's a very interesting idea and a different way to approach it with your students. But again, in respect to everyone's time, what we're gonna do now is October is gonna share her screen and is going to bring up our wheel. We're going to be giving away a book, and I don't have the title right off. It'll be one on teaching historical thinking skills though. So let's see who our winner is today. All right. So Martin is our winner. And Martin, if you will drop us your mailing address, you can either email that to me directly, or you can private message that to me, and we will get a book to you. And again, I want to thank you guys so much for joining us today. A couple of things as we wrap up here. We do love to get your feedback, even as we go forward. Again, we're going to be doing a few more virtual things over the next couple months, and then we'll do our first in-person workshop in July, and then look at doing kind of a mix of the two probably in the future. But we do want to hear from you guys again and what you think works well. And today we would, of course, love to hear your feedback on the two lesson plans in development that we shared with you today. So again, please feel free to drop that in there. we will be sending out participation certificates for today. So again, we'll get those based on the feedback form that you're filling out right now. So be sure to complete that. And then we will also be posting a video of today's session. So if there's something you want to go back for reference, or if you want to share it with a colleague, I'll share the link to that with everyone. So again, that you have that as well. And we'll also, in that follow-up email with your PD certificate, share with you the drafts of the 2 activities that were shared today. And that will be a chance for you to kind of go ahead and take a closer look at that and maybe think about how you might use some of these sources today. So again, thank you everyone for your time today. We really do appreciate it. And we hope to see you very soon.